Okay, hi everyone. I'm Amie Anderton, and today Matt Tuten and I will be talking about connecting with partners in relationship to state, private, and tribal forestry and the new upcoming funding opportunities. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. I work for Region 2, State, Private, and Tribal Forestry. I've been here for a little over a year now, since last September of 2022. I'm the Landscape Scale Restoration Program Manager. And most recently, I've taken on the role of being the Inflation Reduction Act Program Manager, so IRA. We'll be referring to that frequently throughout this presentation. And it's for a landowner assistance. Matt, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Matt Tuten. I am a Cooperative Forestry Program Manager with State, Private, and Tribal Forestry in Region 2. Been doing this job for almost 2 years now. But prior to that, I was a forester working in Western Colorado, and I'm actually located in Pagosa Springs. And so I manage primarily the Forest Stewardship Program, which I'll talk about a little bit today, and then also work pretty closely with the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute in Colorado, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. So good to meet everybody.
Thanks, Matt. So next slide. So today we're going to discuss the topics that you probably saw on the registration. What is state, private, and tribal forestry? Why do we want to strengthen these relationships with the collaboratives that are on the ground in Region 2? Also, what's up with the new funding that's going on? There's a lot happening, especially with the IRA landowner assistance. So to get things started, first of all, if you have any questions, we're going to leave those for the end of the presentation, and you can put those in the chat. Katie's going to monitor those as we go. So to get things started, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
All right, so I wanted to start off a little bit today by highlighting the Forest Service's mission statement. And so, as you can read here, the Forest Service really exists to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands for the present and the future. And so, one thing I want to point out is that this statement could have easily read national forests and grasslands instead of the nation's forests and grasslands. And so I just want to point out it intentionally states nations, because we sometimes always think about the Forest Service mission as really being sort of coincident with the management of national forests, but it's actually a bit more complicated than that. And our mission really extends to all the forests nationwide, not just those found on national forest lands. So as you might expect, that's where state, private, and tribal forestry comes in, with these other lands other than national forests. And so to sort of expound on this, I'm going to do kind of a quick tour of the Forest Service organization. I think part of being part of state, private, and tribal forestry involves explaining how state, private, and tribal forestry fits into the organization and what we do. And so I kind of want to explain that a little bit by looking at the Forest Service organization closely. So starting things off, at the top, we have the Office of the Chief Randy Moore. He's based out of Washington, D.C., and you'll often see this group, these offices found in D.C., called the Washington Office, or the WO, which we tend to just sort of throw around as if everyone understands that acronym. You see there's a few of these nationwide offices, including a few that aren't even on this older chart, including law enforcement. And so these are sort of high-level nationwide offices found in DC. Also under the chief are leadership staff. And so I think folks are probably familiar with regional foresters, Frank Bem in Region 2 being our regional forester. They report directly to the chief. We also have the heads of the research stations, and then also the leadership for state, private, and tribal forestry in the eastern U.S., especially the northeastern U.S., mainly because there's a lot of private land in that part of the world and not much national forest. And so it's a little bit differently organized in that part of the world than it is in the rest of the country. Beyond that group, we have the deputy chief areas. You'll hear folks refer to these parts of the Forest Service as deputy areas, deputy chief areas. Essentially, these are different branches of the agency. And so the first two are centralized financial and business support. These are the parts of the organization that you'll hear Forest Service folks refer to as the folks at the Albuquerque Service Center, because they're centralized in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They support all the other deputy areas, kind of work mostly behind the scenes, kind of don't have a lot of relevance to external partners, mostly support internal operations, but are very important, of course, right? This middle branch deputy area is the National Forest System. So this is essentially the part of the Forest Service that almost everybody has come to know as the U.S. Forest Service. So this is approximately 85% of the employees, the 154 national forests, over 180 million acres nationwide, found in almost every state but 10. And then this also includes other areas such as national grasslands, which we see in the Great Plains in this region. And so oftentimes Forest Service and this deputy area are seen as the same thing, but it's actually, like I'm explaining, a little bit more diverse than that. We also have the Research and Development branch. I think folks may be familiar with this branch because it includes programs like the Rocky Mountain Research Station, which you see in Fort Collins and around the Western US. There's also Southern and Northern and Central research stations. And then also the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program, this continuous forest inventory. And so that's within this branch. And then that brings us lastly to state, private, and tribal forestry. And as we've mentioned, this supports work on all these other lands other than federal lands. We're a much smaller part of the organization. We have about 400 people versus about 27,000 people in the rest of the organization, most of them being in the National Forest System. So a much tinier part of the organization. We really only exist at regional and national levels. And we control a much smaller portion of the budget that we grant to external organizations, primarily states, but then other organizations like we'll talk about today. And so just kind of moving on to how we're organized, there's essentially three major divisions in state, private, and tribal forestry. There's tribal relations, there's forest health protection, and then a whole suite of cooperative forestry programs. And each of these programs is authorized by the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act, which was a law passed back in 1978 that authorized funding for these different programs, which I'll talk about in a moment here. So we've been around about since that time, with some changes throughout the intervening time periods, but essentially for that long. Before I jump into those, I want to mention an important piece of the organization that kind of exists between branches. And so in Region 2, this is the Cooperative Fire Program. So this is a small group that works closely with state and private entities, but is aligned both with state and private and tribal forestry, but also the fire programs in the National Forest System. So this program works on interagency agreements for fire management, fire assistance grants, fire prevention and education grants. And then a big one I wanted to mention today, because we're not going to focus on it, is that Cooperative Fire manages the Community Wildfire Defense Grants, which is a big part of forestry assistance nationwide that came about as part of the infrastructure law. And so this is an important piece of funding for forestry on state lands and private lands, but we're not really going to talk about it today. So I definitely wanted to mention that before we got too far into this. So jumping into the different cooperative forestry programs, In tribal relations, we have 48 tribal governments within Region 2, and as well as forest landscapes and resources that are of great importance to Indigenous peoples. And so since these people are the original inhabitants of the lands, and there's federal mandates for engagement, we have a program focused on tribal relations that works across all the deputy areas to ensure that Indigenous perspectives and governments are integrated in all activities and outcomes for the Forest Service. So that's one key branch of state, private, and tribal. Another area you may have heard about is the Forest Health Protection Staff. And so these are the experts on forest insects, diseases, and invasive plants within the Forest Service. And they provide assessments and assistance across all forest lands in the region, including private lands, but also on national forest lands. They also provide implementation grants to states and also national forests. One thing that you may be familiar with that this group works on is the annual statewide forest health aerial inventory, which is completed by folks flying around the plane and making note of forest insects and pathogens on the ground. This program has 3 service centers spread across the region in Colorado. One of them is located in Lakewood, another one located in Gunnison, and then we also have another one outside of Colorado up in Rapid City, South Dakota. And so now we'll talk about some of the programs that are considered cooperative forestry programs. And I'll just do a quick run through of the different programs that make up cooperative forestry in the region that were authorized by that 1978 law. And so the first one is the Forest Legacy and Community Forest Program. This program supports the financing and acquisition of forest lands and also conservation easements in Colorado. And so an example of what this program does is the acquisition of around 151 acres of forest to 4,000 acre community open space in southern Colorado outside of the community of San Luis. These efforts are kind of involved because we're acquiring lands for conservation. And so some of these projects take multiple years to accomplish and takes big chunks of funding to complete. So this one was started in 2016 and it was completed in 2019. So it took about 3 years to accomplish. I've also put, just for folks' reference, the program managers at the regional office to contact, and we'll share this presentation afterwards. So if folks have questions about these, they can get in contact with the regional office contacts for each of these programs. Next one is the Urban and Community Forestry Program. So this program is focused on maintaining and promoting urban tree canopies. And so through this program, we provide grants to states and communities for things like tree planting, long-term forest planning, and then a range of other forest management activities within urban areas. Big ones are insect treatments and hazard tree removal. One thing that's big in Region 2 right now is treatments and response to emerald ash borer, which is affecting ash trees in urban forests. And so that's a big focus in this program. Another program you may have heard of is the Wood Innovations and Biomass Programs. This is a handful of programs that support utilization of forest products to produce finished wood products and biomass energy. And this comes through a range of programs or a range of grant programs to sawmills and wood product producers. And then more recently, through the infrastructure law, this program started managing grants for water crossing bridges for forestry operations on the ground, and then also funding for community firewood banks, or areas where folks in the community can go to get firewood during the cold winter months. And from those programs, I'll move on to the Forest Stewardship Program, which is kind of loosely grouped in a set of programs that are directly considered forest landowner assistance in state and private forestry. And so the Forest Stewardship Program is probably the one that's been around the longest. It's the program I manage. And this program provides capacity grants to state forestry agencies to help them assist forest landowners in managing their forest lands. And the goal of this program is to keep these forests productive and healthy, to promote economic benefits like forest product outputs and environmental benefits, habitat, fire hazard reduction, etc. And these grants are generally used by states to fund forestry capacity, foresters' salaries, to complete forestry planning on private lands. And so in Colorado, most of this funding goes to support the Colorado Forest Ag Program. And this program is a program many of you may be aware of. Essentially, what this program does is provides tax incentives to landowners who produce forest products through the management of their properties. And so last fiscal year, this program supported planning on 450,000 acres of private forest lands in Colorado, including 12,000 new updated forest plans with 1,000 different landowners. And then it also supports production of seedlings. And in last year, it was around 300,000 seedlings produced and distributed. Something that's of increasing importance as we respond to some of these more recent wildfires. And so give a little bit of overview of how landowner assistance works. State agencies and partners approach unengaged landowners, educate, build awareness, and then this forestry capacity grant funding goes to assist with planning. The Forest Stewardship Program provides some forest management planning standards for state agencies. And the goal really of these plans is to implement them to manage forest properties on the ground, support industry, and environmental benefits. And so in Colorado and in many states, that requires additional financial assistance, which we'll talk about a little bit more today. This can come from states. This can also come from non-governmental organizations, but then also through federal landowner assistance programs. A major one being NRCS programs, particularly the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, but also some of the new programs we're going to talk about today that were funded by the Inflation Reduction Act. And then lastly, in the stewardship program, we track planning, acreage, and implementation, right? So we can have some idea of how these funds are being spent towards positive outcomes on the ground. With that, I'll hand it over to Amie to talk about some of our financial assistance programs.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about, first of all, landscape scale restoration, or LSR. This is a competitive grant process, a program that allows restoration of priority forest landscapes with collaboratives and partners. These funds are across multiple areas, including state governments, tribes and tribal nations, and areas of private forest land. This program addresses natural resource issues such as insect and disease, watershed protection, wildlife risk reduction, wildfire risk reduction, etc. These projects are developed with stakeholders, and the stakeholders do the work and the implementation, and they're also reviewed on a yearly basis. Next slide. So who is eligible to submit these projects? They can be a variety of people. They could be state government, local government, nonprofit organizations, tribes and tribal nations, and also educational institutions. You can request funds between $25,000 and $300,000. The project life is 3 years. The funds can only be spent on non-industrial private forest land or rural state forest land. There's also a 1-to-1 match. Also, as I mentioned before, this is a competitive grant application process, and the funds are awarded on a competitive basis. Next slide. So states accept applications from partners in their state, and from there they review each application coming in from partners and determine which proposals will be submitted. States are only allowed to submit up to 5 proposals total. So all these grants are submitted through forestrygrants.gov. And this application process is facilitated and managed through the Western Forestry Leadership Coalition, or known as WFLC. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with them, but they set up the application process, the deadlines, and then they work with the Forest Service program managers that are in the Western side of the US to execute promoting the application process. They also assemble, WFLC also assembles the application submitted, and then they facilitate the review process. So the LSR proposal review team spends about a month and a half reviewing all these applications. They review them, they score them, and then WFLC will take those final review scores and determine what proposals will be awarded. And then they recommend their final list to the Washington office, where the Washington office will have approval from the chief. So most of these announcements are mostly made in the spring. This application, unfortunately, for this time is closed already. It closed November 17th. The LSR review team is currently reviewing all these applications. The tribal applications, there's another part of this, is the tribal portion. The tribal applications are currently open, and the deadline is December 15th. The project submittal through the tribal application process is through grants.gov. The tribal application is very similar, but the application process is also a little bit different because they go through grants.gov. So right now, I'm working with our tribal program manager in Region 2 to spread the word. And so next year, LSR application process will open up roughly around August of 2024. Next slide.
Yeah, Amy, real quick before we move on, I just wanted to mention that within Region 2, the states that seem to be the most successful at this program, almost are powerhouses in the Western US, are Kansas and Nebraska. And so I think it's pretty common for at least 2 proposals coming from either of those states to be funded every year. And I think they're kind of an example of states that have done really well with this program. And you can go to this WFLC site, and there's actually an archive of some of the previous proposals that we're funding, and it's kind of a funding history for folks who are interested in kind of learning what types of proposals have been funded in the past.
Yeah, you know, Matt, you're right. Like Nebraska and Kansas are our leading states right now in Region 2. They, Nebraska every year for the last, I think, 4 years have submitted 5 proposals, and every year they get awarded. And generally, a lot of the times, most of their proposals are in the top 10 proposals. So we do have some successful proposals going on in Region 2.
Absolutely. All right.
So I'm going to get into the rest of the presentation is going to be with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we will be briefing this on a surface level in a few ways. Matt, can you forward to, is there any way to forward to what the current IRA assistant program is? Right here. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to touch base on what it is right now. The NOFO, I'm going to call it NOFO. You're going to hear that a few times in here. It's a Notice of Funding Opportunity. So this Notice of Funding Opportunity was formally announced August 22nd of 2023. So just about 3 months ago, not too long ago. This is a really new program put in place, and it's really a new program to us. We are still learning new things about this program almost every day. We ask a lot of questions. This was authorized with the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act of 1978, and it falls under the the LSR program guidelines. This act has financial assistance for projects that support underserved landowners and small acreage forest landowners in emerging private markets for climate mitigation and forest resilience. This is only on non-industrial private forest land. So this is all provided through a grant process. So as of right now, there is 4 provisions, and we'll get into that with that one previous slide that Matt had up. But right now, we have 2 provisions that are going through the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Provision 2 supports the, so they're highlighted right here. Provision 2 supports the participation of underserved landowners in emerging private markets for climate mitigation or forest resilience. And then provision 3 is about the same thing, but it includes the small acreage landowners owning 2,500 acres of land or less. So I'll explain more about these provisions in further down. But proposals, let's see here. So let's do the next slide.
What?
There you go. So we're going to get into what is that non-industrial private land that I talk about. So it's defined as those areas, those outside of urbanized areas. So urbanized areas could mean a town or a city with a population above 50,000 people. So all that area around that. It needs to have a landscape that has existing tree cover and is suitable for growing trees. It is also owned by a private landowner, or could be an association or a corporation or even a tribe. So if you see on here, this map shows the area west of Denver. The dark green is all US Forest Service land. The purple is tribal and state land. The orange is corporate. And then the light green represents the private land. So the light green is pretty hard to see in there, but you can see it if you squint a little bit. So next slide. Okay, so who are these underserved landowners? So they're beginning farmers, ranchers, they're even forest landowners. They're farmers and ranchers living in high poverty areas. There's also federally recognized tribes. They're limited resource producers, and they're also veterans. And we do have a more detailed description of all these underserved landowners, and you can find those in that formal NOFO announcement. You can also identify geographic locations of these underserved landowners with the USDA Economic Research Service, or ERA, to determine these poverty areas. And then also you can use that CGES tool. So I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with the CGES tool, but Matt is going to explain this next. So I'll pass it over to you, Matt.
Yeah, so the Climate Economic Justice Screening Tool, or CGEST, is a tool that highlights these disadvantaged census tracts across the entire nation, states and territories. And so if they are in these census tracts that meet the thresholds for one of the tool categories of burden, they qualify as disadvantaged. And then also all areas within the boundaries of federally recognized tribes also qualify within the categories of this tool. And so these are the different categories that were that are used to classify or to account for areas of burden. And so I'll just kind of step through one of these census tracts in the center of Colorado here in the next couple slides. And so example here is Lake County, Colorado. This is a tract that actually surrounds the community of Leadville. If it shows up as blue on this map, shaded blue on this map, that means that the community or census tract qualifies as being disadvantaged. And then when you click on one of these tracts, it'll highlight which of these categories a particular area qualifies as burdened. And so to zoom in a little bit more on this area of Lake County, it qualifies as disadvantaged under criteria under each of these categories. So under climate change, it has both an expected population loss rate above the threshold that qualifies, as well as low income, which is what's needed under climate change. Under energy, it has high energy costs as well as low income. So that would qualify this area under that category. It also has transportation barriers, including the average cost and time spent on transportation, as well as low income. It has an abandoned mine, as well as low income, which qualifies under the legacy pollution category. And then under workforce development, it has linguistic barriers, linguistic isolation, essentially non-English speakers over 14 above a certain threshold in this area, as well as the percentage of people ages 25 or greater without a high school diploma. And so within these categories, the CGES tool explains what the threshold is for qualifying as disadvantaged under these categories. And it will highlight each category if it a certain census tract meets that category requirement. You don't need to have this many categories qualify, you just need one, but in this case, it qualifies for several. And so under this aspect of the definition for disadvantage, Lake County would qualify as disadvantaged for these programs. So there's a lot that's been said nationwide about what it means to qualify as disadvantaged, but another equally confusing area of the law is what are emerging private markets for climate mitigation or forest resilience. I've mentioned this definition or this law to many folks, and I'll oftentimes get a raised eyebrow, like, what does that mean exactly? And then usually a conversation will ensue. But essentially what an emerging private market is it's a market that accounts for the value of some sort of ecosystem service and then formalizes interactions between buyers and sellers of the benefits of that service, very generally. And so really the goal here is to get a market-based solution or approach to bring funding to forest conservation on private lands and to create funding streams for landowners that can be reinvested in forest management on those properties. So kind of an evergreen source of funding for forest management. But what that means can vary quite a bit because these are fairly general guidelines. And so I'll just go through a few examples and sort of summarize here in the end. So one of the most obvious concepts that comes to mind is the idea of carbon markets. And so carbon markets are really selling the value of carbon that's either reduced, avoided, or sequestered in the form of credits. This usually involves the loss of carbon avoided by restoring forests or the planting of new forests that can acquire carbon or various forms of soil management. And one of the reasons why this is important is that this market is expected to grow significantly over the next decade or more. It'll probably be enhanced quite a bit if caps are putting on carbon in the US as they have been elsewhere around the globe. And so this is one sort of example of an emerging market that folks may be familiar with. Moving on to some less clear examples of emerging markets. Another one would be the idea of water funds. An example of this would be the Rio Grande Water Fund, which is a fund down in New Mexico and Southern Colorado that's essentially a collaboration between downstream water users, water providers, and then conservation organizations that manage forests in the upstream source watersheds. And the goal of this fund is to connect downstream funding with upstream forest management to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration. So one example, another example closer to home that was identified by the Washington office as a emerging market is payments for watershed services. So an example here would be the Denver Water Forest to Faucets program. I think many folks in this group may be familiar with this, probably much more than me. It's a partnership between Denver Water, the Forest Service, U.S. Forest Service, the Colorado State Forest Service, and NRCS, which invests at this point almost $100 million from water utility provider funding to forest management in the upstream. And the goal here, or the upstream watersheds, and the goal is to really avoid the costly impacts of these costly catastrophic wildfires on water supply infrastructure. The difference between the water fund and forest to faucets is that this is more of a singular source of funding versus a group of funding in the Rio Grande Water Fund. But to really summarize emerging markets, I'll mention again that this is really any system that accounts for ecosystem services and then has both buyers and sellers of the benefits of those services. And so I mentioned sort of the top three on this list, but this could include other things on this list, including things like conservation banks, water quality or water rights trading programs. It could include things like forest product certification or forest sustainability labeling programs, a whole range of innovative conservation financing approaches, and probably a range of other things that aren't even on this list. And I think the Washington office in the Forest Service took a very broad perspective on what qualifies as an emerging market, because there's so many things coming online in the past few years, because these are predominantly novel programs that we're talking about here. Yeah, and with that, I'll hand it back over to Amie.
Okay, so I'm going to touch base on exactly how to apply for these and what the criteria is for the IRA. Just like LSR, there are the same entities that are able to apply for these projects: the nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations, tribes, units of local government, state forestry agencies, etc. The project life for this is 3 years as well, but projects within the IRA can be able to extend up to 5 years, but not any more than that. But they have that opportunity to actually extend their project. Funds can only be spent on non-industrial private forest lands, and then, which, as a reminder, in the previous one, it's areas outside of those urbanized areas of 50,000 people or more. And it's also can be forest state land that's also rural. There's good news with this IRA, unlike LSR, is there's no match requirement. And so it makes it easier for organizations or partners to apply. This again is a competitive process, and awarded proposals will be in the form of a grant or a cooperative agreement. This notice of funding and opportunity, or NOFO, is divided up into 4 tracks: tracks A, B, C, and the tribal track, which I'll touch base on next. So next slide. So every track, this is track A. So every track in this NOFO was announced on August 22nd. And all of them have a lot of similar criteria. Some of them are different. So I'll briefly go over all of those. So the estimated for this track A, the estimated funding total for this is $100 million that was given. The funding request can be no less than $2 million, but no more than $25 million. It covers those provisions 2 and 3 that I had mentioned earlier. And this NOFO doesn't apply to individual landowners to apply themselves, but it's more directed towards those groups that represent underserved landowners and there to support them. There's quarterly reporting that's required, and proposals can be submitted through grants.gov. So as you can see on the bottom, this track has already closed. The deadline was October 25th. This track was actually only open for 2 months. So that was really fast and furious. This track was actually designed for those organizations and groups that were already doing this type of work that could hit the ground running. So, and these were a lot of big corporations and nationwide groups that applied for this. So I'm on the national panel that reviewed these applications, and there was a total of 52 applications that came in for track A. We've already reviewed them and scored them. So as of right now, all of our scores and our reviewed proposals are at the Washington office level. The Washington office is reviewing these scores, and they're going to determine appropriately how to divide up all of that $100 million between those 52 proposals that got awarded. After that, they'll give their recommendations to the chief for approval. So next slide. So this is track B. Track B is a lot like track A. Same, it was announced in the same day. All these tracks were. The total amount of funding is $150 million for this track. And this funding request for each proposal is less than $2 million and no greater than $2 million. So again, the life of the project is 3 years, and they can extend for 5, no match requirement. So currently this track is open and is open for a full year to submit a proposal into grants.gov. The full year deadline will be August 22nd of 2024. So you have that full year to apply. So organizations have the opportunity to be able to submit their applications on a quarterly basis. So the next deadline is November 30th, which is tomorrow, which is kind of fast and for you guys to understand, or it's kind of a quick turnaround, which probably wouldn't be happening at this moment, but there are also these opportunities for quarterly. So the next one, any applications that are submitted after November 30th, tomorrow, will be counted as a group. So December 1st to February 29th will be one group of proposals that will be reviewed by the national panel. So they're going to do it in one batch every quarter. So applications will be reviewed every 3 months. It's highly encouraged that people apply for track B as soon as possible, just because of the review period takes a while and it's hard to get through all of the funding mechanisms. So it could take several months. So the Washington office is really encouraging individuals and organizations to apply now or apply as soon as possible. If an application is submitted and it's not accepted in the first go around, the batch of proposals, then the Forest Service can actually choose to hold that proposal and have it reviewed again at the next quarterly deadline. So there's a list of dates too that I could actually add and send your way if you're interested to see what the batch of review processes are, the batch of proposals. So next slide. So track C is different from track A and B in some ways. The most difference with track, it has a higher funding mechanism. So it's the funding level is between $5 and $50 million for a funding request. This is basically an opportunity for nonprofit organizations focus on sustainable forestry and offer sub-grant programs to their organization. So this is currently open, and any organizations that are interested in this opportunity, program managers have been told to directly route them up to the Washington office level for more information. Next slide. So the other track is also the tribal track. So as of right now, the Washington office is currently fine-tuning their new tribal NOFO. They're estimating this NOFO is going to come out late January. We're hoping still that is still the deadline. At this point, we don't know the details of when exactly, what date that is coming out. We're going to have several meetings. We have been. We're going to have several meetings in the next month to get more information about this tribal NOFO. What we do know is that it covers provisions 2 and 3, like track A, B, and C. And it'll be best suited for cooperative agreements. We also don't know the deadline as well. So there's a lot of unknowns to this. But even though this new NOFO isn't available to tribes, tribes also have the opportunity to apply for track B. So we are right now encouraging tribes to apply for track B. They can apply for track B, and then they can also apply for this new NOFO that's coming out. The Washington office is just waiting for those funding mechanisms to be a little more solid before we have some clear definition. So next slide. I think this is you, Matt.
Yeah, so a couple opportunities from the Inflation Reduction Act that aren't online just yet relate to provisions 1 and 4 that we haven't really talked about much yet today. And so provisions 1 and 4 fund a competitive grant program that provides funding for climate mitigation or forest resilience practices. And I think that's a big distinction from some of the other programs that want to engage landowners in emerging private markets for forest resilience. These are more focused on paying for implementation of the practices that either can mitigate climate changes, enhance forest resilience, or in provision 4 here, provide measurable increases in carbon sequestration and storage. So like I said, these aren't online yet, and I think I wanted to share a little bit of the complexity here in that since this is a nationwide program, and the fact that climate change is not expected to affect the nation similarly everywhere, it's been a little bit complex to develop a program that addresses this continuously across the entire country. And as an example, in Colorado, one of our biggest threats to forest resiliency is wildfire. And by influencing forest structure to reduce fire hazards and impacts, we may or may not increase carbon storage and provide adaptation to a changing climate. And so somewhere in between doing nothing and a range of forestry practices will meet whatever definition is required to implement a practice to address climate mitigation and forest resilience. And so we have a lot of figuring out to do to understand what qualifies and how this program will work. And we'll likely have a new set of tracks that will be coming out in the future that address these portions of the law that affect or that pay for forestry practices. And so to sort of summarize how all these fit together, we have this set of tracks A, B, C, and the tribal notice of funding opportunities that Amie has described. So she mentioned track A is closed. This was once for some of those groups that were ready to hit their ground running. So that closed in already, but there is some potential for a future notice of funding opportunity in 2025. Tracks B and C are still open, even though the first round of reviews is set to take place, or the first set of proposal reviews is going to take place starting in a few days. So those are currently open and are expected to continue for the next year. And then the tribal notice of funding opportunity is expected to come online sometime in early 2024, and the details of that funding opportunity will be determined here soon. These tracks or these opportunities to implement provisions 1 and 4, to implement climate smart forestry practices are still being determined. We don't yet quite have an idea of when these notices are going to come out, but will likely come out in 2024, but it's still uncertain at this time. Anything more to say on that, Amie?
Nope, I think that was great.
Okay. Hand it back over to you.
So before or during the application process, there's an opportunity for organizations to seek help if they need. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this, but there is a community navigator program. Navigators are there to help organizations that are representing or planning to represent underserved landowners or small acreage landowners. It is there to help provide resources to help these organizations build their climate mitigation projects. They reach out to communities over guidance and support, and they create that bridge to underserved communities to access funding and find the right partners to work with. There's already 3 navigator groups in place: COCO, coalitions and collaboratives, Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, and then the Watershed Center for Help. There's also going to be 2 more navigators joining this group. I'm not actually sure who they are at this point, but that's what we've been told by the Washington office. So if there's more information, if you would like to have more information on them, you can see their website with the link below at communitynavigators.net. So next slide. So Matt and I just wanted to kind of talk about what the bigger picture is with this IRA to kind of conclude a little bit. So we just wanted to highlight that bigger picture and the message and the intent behind this act. So much of our nation's forest is privately owned, and now private landowners have that opportunity to be able to be part of the solution to climate crisis, no matter what their background is or no matter what their means are. The Inflation Reduction Act is the largest climate investment in history right now, and it's available to help underserved communities and those small acreage landowners to connect to those voluntary climate markets. Also, if you see the President's Justice 40 initiative is on there, that sets a goal of delivering 40% of the overall benefits of climate and clean energy to disadvantaged communities. These markets can also provide economic opportunities for landowners and promote forest health and management. These investments have the intent to expand access to markets that were previously out of reach to these landowners. And it also allows these landowners to address climate change initiatives and opportunities and support rural communities. And they also maintain that land ownership for those future generations. Matt, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think one thing I can add is that sometimes in forestry financial assistance, we do a really good job, and historically we've done a really good job of helping folks, landowners, forest landowners, who have the time and resources to really engage with these financial assistance programs. So if you think about time as a resource, folks who are disadvantaged may not have as much time to learn about programs and engage in the conversations required to really capitalize on some of this assistance. Oftentimes, participation in these programs requires that landowners have money to pay for treatments up front to get reimbursed after treatments are completed. And so that's another area that's been difficult in the past or has been a barrier for folks to engage in some of these programs in the past. And so really these programs are an effort to really engage these folks who have kind of been left out historically. I'd say it's not perfect. We're trying to figure out ways to set definitions for folks to qualify for these programs, trying to be comprehensive while at the same time trying to be specific at the same time. So I think another thing I'd mention is that connecting landowners with emerging private markets is a really new approach, since many of these market-based funding solutions have only come online in the past few years. And so I think as we proceed through these programs, we all expect to learn a lot about what works, what doesn't work. And I think kind of a goal of this investment is to really get fluent in how to engage landowners with these programs to learn and adjust in the future. And so and I guess lastly here is that none of these programs are going to be implemented by the Forest Service staff themselves. This is going to be, these programs will only be successful working through partners that are in this webinar and elsewhere in the state. And so we really can't do this without the assistance of states, nonprofit organizations, and other partners. So with that, here is just a range of links to different resources, both to the landscape scale restoration program and both the Washington office and Region 2 contacts for these programs. And Amie, I don't know if you want to say anything else to wrap things up.
Yeah, so this IRA Forest Landowner Assistance Program website is a Forest Service website. There was, when this IRA came out, there was a team of people that were hired just for the IRA landowner assistance at the Washington office level. So they have developed this website. They put a bunch of information on this website. They have the actual NOFO formal announcement. They have webinar recordings. They have an FAQ document. They also have a separate document for emerging private markets. So there's a lot of information on there that you could find to get more information, or even forward this to somebody that might be interested. They also have that email address, if you see below that link. That is basically an email to ask any questions to that staff, and they'll be sure to answer those for you. It's a lot of information to digest. Matt and I, as program managers, we work really well together. We've been disseminating information that comes from the Washington office, and we're still learning. We have quite an extensive mailing list that we're building, and I send out updates. I send out information frequently to people. So if there's any type of information any of you would like to have, I'm happy to help. Matt is there too. We can give you information, both email, and we can also have further conversation if needed as well.
Well, thank you both so much. That was a lot of information, like you said, and that was really helpful, at least for me, hopefully for others as well. I'll give people a few minutes to put questions in the chat, and I'll just go ahead and kick off the questions because I know I've got a few written down. One question that I have is, so we're the Colorado Forest Collaboratives Network. Most of the people on here either coordinate or are in some way associated with collaboratives. I'm curious how many applications you're getting from these sort of place-based groups as opposed to larger like state or local government agencies. So do you get a lot of applications from collaboratives? Have you seen many of them be successful, or do you have tips for collaboratives that might want to break through?
You know, are you speaking of the IRA applications?
Kind of all of them, but yeah, probably mostly the IRA.
Yeah, so IRA right now, you know, the vetting process is really through that grants.gov process. So I have seen applications come in recently through that track A, the national review team. And we were given 52 proposals to review. There was a total request of $488 million when there's only $100 million to distribute. So there was a huge request for funding. A lot of the applications I reviewed were at the national level. Some of them involved some areas in region 2 but it wasn't actually a national based corporation. So I think there was also the Forest Stewards Guild too that applied. I did not see their application, but there are some applications that are kind of around this area. A lot of them were in the east. We're not sure about the track B. Matt and I have been very diligent about getting the word out, and we have not heard or seen at least on my end, I have not seen who is going to be applying. And so we will see those once those come in that first quarter batch. I don't know if Matt, you have seen any others either.
Yeah, I think track A has definitely been the focus, especially for bigger nationwide entities like Amie mentioned. I think now that that's closed, we're likely to see some more regionally focused or state focused proposals. But I think folks are just now starting to understand how these programs work, and questions are getting answered that I expect things to kind of ramp up over the next few months. As far as the landscape scale restoration program goes, I have heard questions about that program from collaborative forestry groups over the past year or so. I think right now there is a lot of funding coming from different directions as a result of the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. And so I think the LSR program being a smaller maximum request has probably been a little bit subdued because some bigger opportunities were available in the last couple of years. That said, I think it might be a really good opportunity for folks working at the community level who have a very defined need that doesn't require a massive financial assistance investment. And so I would encourage folks to look into that program, where it might apply. I mean, I think one thing that's special about it is that there's a whole lot of variation in how it can be applied across the Western US. And I think you'll definitely see that if you take a look at the grant website and just see what types of proposals have been funded in the past. So I think for community groups, that might be almost the ideal scale for engaging with some of these Forest Service landowner assistance programs.
To add on to that, I've seen a lot of different proposals that I didn't realize that they were being accepted as emerging private markets. Like I reviewed a proposal that is developing an app to be able to help underserved landowners gain access to information. Another one was a website, develop technology, a website for these underserved landowners. Another one was harvesting botanicals in the forest to sell to herbal companies. So it's very interesting, the definition of emerging private markets that are coming out of this. It's a really broad scope of information that's happening right now that is very interesting to read, that these different organizations are coming up of what they consider that is an emerging private market.
Awesome. And do you feel like the other reviewers are like excited about those creative interpretations?
I think that there's excitement happening, but also a little bit of confusion, to be honest, because we're still trying to figure this out. I think that everyone is trying to clearly understand what emerging private market is, especially when you have these large corporations asking for $12 million to be able to run their company when they had 2 months to make a proposal. So I think a lot of it, we've been having side discussions on if this is really considered an emerging private market and what is coming out of the IRA as well, as if they're hand in hand,
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions from the audience? I do have one more question. This isn't related to the funding opportunities necessarily, but kind of going back to the beginning when you were talking about the general setup and what you all do. I'm wondering if you have resources for collaboratives who are interested in engaging more with tribes. If you have like, do you work at all with communities who are trying to set up those relationships, or are you more just like on the funding side of supporting tribes?
I could jump in on that. Well, I'll mention that I don't work directly within the tribal relations organization within state and private, but work with the program manager. And I think what John Vladimir-Tiff is his name, the regional tribal relations program manager. What he does is work very closely with a network of tribal liaisons across the region and staff on national forests. And so I think if folks have questions about how to engage with a particular tribal community, what I would do is put them in touch with John. He recently hired an assistant working with him, covering the big area in Region 2. And I think they would be the best place to engage and talk about questions, concerns, opportunities, because they have these relationships throughout the region through these networks of tribal relations coordinators. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And his contact info was on that slide, right?
Yep. John Vladimir-Tiff. And their names are hyperlinked, so you can send them an email by clicking on those slides.
Well, yeah, that'll be really helpful. And just, I put it in the chat as well, but just so everybody knows, we'll be sending out a follow-up email, and that'll include the slides, meeting recording, and any other resources if we come up with any other things that people might want to have access to. Is the link to the previously submitted and reviewed applications, is that in this slideshow somewhere?
Yeah, so if you go to, I think it's the first link on this last slide through the Western Forest Leadership Coalition, this has a link at this link that shows you the funding history within the program going back several years. I'm not sure how many, but it shows which projects were funded and which ones weren't funded in previous years.
Awesome.
And then I'm sure at some point when they formally announce the IRA that they'll be posting that probably on their website, and there'll be a formal announcement coming through a press release as well.
Great.
Yeah, and I guess I'd say like some of this is pretty new, and in my experience, I've worked in the region for almost 15 years now, and I think unlike any other thing I've dealt with, there's more questions around these programs because of all these new subjects and opportunities involved that it takes me a while to process what I'm seeing, to really ask good questions. So if folks take a look at this stuff, review it, please reach out, set up a conversation with Amie or myself, and we'd love to talk more and recognize that this is new territory, and the questions and opportunities might not be apparent immediately after the presentation.
Yeah, you know, we look at this, there's $450 million that it's kind of like a windfall of money that just happened, and it was fast and furious trying to execute and get the funding out and get the word out. And so we are hoping that we have some organizations or partners that are willing to hop on board, because we think that this is a great funding opportunity for people, and we would love to have something in our region for this.
Yeah, thank you. And for context, the way that this branching out session originated was Matt had approached me at, I think at Summit, and was like, we've got all this funding coming through. We know there's a lot of questions. We know it's super confusing, but we really want to work with people and we really want to help people to the best of our ability. So I know that if you reach out to either Amie or Matt, or probably any of the other people linked on this presentation, they would probably be very excited and willing to help out and answer any follow-up questions that people end up having after processing for a while. Awesome. Well, if nobody else has questions at this time, I might go ahead and wrap us up a little bit early. Just as a reminder, I know that I said this at the beginning. Oh, we did have one. Just if we want to discuss potential projects, should we reach out to Amie and Matt directly?
Yes, definitely reach out to us. And if we don't know the question, we will get you the answer. But yes, that would be a great resource.